Prime Minister Netanyahu said that far from being the perpetrators of genocide, Israel was the victims of genocide. He said that everything that took place in the court behind me today was nothing but hypocrisy and lies. Now, South Africa, which brought this case because it is a member, a party to the court, as are all member countries of the United Nations, what it did today was it invoked the horror of what's happening in Gaza, the suffering, the destruction, the hunger. But you know, that's not enough. It's not enough to say that Israel caused this. What South Africa has to prove is that that isn't a byproduct of Israel's war with Hamas. It's not what people call collateral damage. It's actually Israel's intention. What they're saying is that Israel's aim is to erase the Palestinian people, to wipe them out, destroy them as a group, in whole or in part. That's what genocide is, which obviously Israel denies. Now, what happened today is going to take a long time for the judges to make a decision about whether it really is genocide. But what they can do in the short term is, if they think that South Africa's case is plausible, they can, what they say is, indicate interim measures. That means they can require South Africa to stop doing what it's doing in Gaza, and they might do that within the next couple of weeks. This is how the case unfolded today. It's one of the most consequential cases that the International Court of Justice has heard in recent times. Watched closely, not just in South Africa and Israel, but across the world.
Please be seated.
Today, South Africa argued that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza.
Sitting is open.
The South African case rests partially on allegedly genocidal statements by senior Israeli ministers.
The Deputy Speaker of the Knesset, Israel's parliament, has called for the erasure of the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth. The Defense Force agrees. On 9 October, the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, gave a situation update to the army, where he said that as Israel was imposing a complete siege on Gaza, there would be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything would be closed because Israel is fighting human animals.
You must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible. And
a clip of Prime Minister Netanyahu was shown in which he invoked Amalek, a biblical battle in which the Israelites utterly destroyed their enemies, men, women and children. Footage presented in court suggested that Israeli soldiers got the message, singing about Amalek.
The evidence of genocidal intent is not only chilling, it is also overwhelming and incontrovertible.
Outside, supporters of Israel, including family members of those held hostage in Gaza, walked to the courthouse in protest. To them, the allegation of genocide is outrageous because Israelis were the victims of Hamas on October the 7th.
I think there should be no victims on both sides, but they have to wipe out Hamas. That's what they have to do, and that's not a genocide.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
Those who support the Palestinians were there too, grateful to South Africa, which brought the case partly because of the historic links between the anti-apartheid struggle and the Palestinian cause. They hope that this case might lead to individuals being brought before the International Criminal Court. Can you tell us what difference do you think this case will make on the ground in Gaza?
It will make a huge difference. The fact that the state of Israel is held to account by the international community, the soldiers, they know, the authorities in Israel, they know that if they continue, they may one day be called even before the ICC individually and be held accountable. So the message is clear: they must cease, they must desist from the acts of genocide.
South Africa is seeking provisional measures for the judges to require Israel immediately to stop causing further human suffering and loss in Gaza.
South Africa now respectfully and humbly calls on this honourable court to do what is in its power to do, to indicate the provisional measures that are so urgently required to prevent further irreparable harm to the Palestinian people in Gaza, whose hopes, including for their very survival, are now vested in this court.
The sitting is adjourned.
It might take the court a decade to give its verdict on genocide, but if the judges conclude that the South African case is plausible, provisional measures could be announced before the end of this month. Israel will present its defence tomorrow.
Well, I'm now joined by William Schabas, a human rights law expert who chaired the UN Commission of Inquiry into the 2014 Israel-Gaza war. He's also defended Myanmar after it was accused of genocide against the Rohingya Muslims, co-authored a commission on human rights violations in Rwanda, and in the past has advised the Palestine Liberation Organization. William Schabas, what do you make of the case that South Africa has set out?
Well, the first thing to understand is that this is not all going to be decided in the next 2 or 3 days. This is a very preliminary skirmish that's going on between South Africa and Israel, and we won't get to the merits of the case for probably 4 years.
And in that preliminary skirmish, could it result in Israel being ordered to stop fighting, and will that actually happen?
I think it's likely that it will result in an order against Israel. I think it's very likely that that will happen, but how strong that order will be and what it will include is difficult to assess at this point. South Africa's asked for a whole list of things that they would like to be ordered. They will get, I think they'll walk away with a victory. Of course, it'll be a partial victory because they probably won't get all of the things they're asking for. And so Israel will claim that they defeated, South Africa will claim that they were victorious. It will be a divided result. But it will have an impact. I'm very convinced of that. And then it may influence the conflict and ultimately may influence the future, so which makes it difficult to predict what's going to happen in 4 years.
Well, Israel has accused South Africa of functioning as, the legal arm of Hamas, ignoring the fact that Hamas murdered, raped and abducted Israeli citizens on October the 7th. What do you think Israel's defense will be then?
Yeah, I think this sort of talk from Israel, it may sell well in the streets of Tel Aviv, but it's not going to work very well in The Hague at the court. They're going to have to answer the charges and explain them. There's a history of this. So you mentioned the case of Myanmar, which is now still moving its way through the system, but there are many similarities with the sort of arguments that were made by the Gambia against Myanmar in 2019, and that resulted in an order against Myanmar. The threshold of the evidence and the strength of the case, it only has to be plausible for South Africa to succeed. I watched the hearings today. South Africa has a very compelling case. They have very strong arguments, and they're not going to be dismissed by simply saying, well, you're friends of Hamas or something, which I don't believe is true in any case.
I mean, in the end, is this judgment, politics comes into the judgment as well as the legalities, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's the nature of the International Court of Justice. It's a mix of law and politics. And the law will influence the politics. I think one of the things about the result, the likely result here, is that there will be an order against Israel. Israel may be dismissive of it. They've been rather dismissive of it so far of the court, although they're clearly taking the case seriously. But it will be harder for Israel's friends then. They're going to be uncomfortable with Israel taking too aggressive and dismissive a posture with regard to the court, because they're engaged with the court and they respect. I'm talking about Western European countries, about the UK, about Canada, and so on. They're going to have they're not going to want to go along with an attitude that just rejects the International Court of Justice.
What's at stake here? Because there have been suggestions that in some way international law is on trial, the ability to show that, we as a world are capable of holding nations to account.
I mean, it's the beauty of the International Court of Justice. I've been there in cases before. It's the idea of the International Court of Justice. It and its ancestor, they're more than 100 years old now, is the idea that if we're going to have international law, and international law is going to govern things, you have to have a court that can rule on it. And so it's a beautiful institution in that way. It's a marvelous institution, but it's imperfect because this is an imperfect system.
And tarnished by how long everything takes.
Well, unfortunately, but of course, at the same time, these are complicated cases, and you can't rush them either. It does take time. A complicated civil case in the courts here in this country can take years as well. So,
And, well, Russia doesn't take any notice either. That's the other thing.
no, they don't, but it will impact them as well, and the decisions will impact them, and they all know it, and they treat it seriously. And when you get down to the bottom of it all, they also have respect for the court and for the judges who make it up.